This video captures a simulation of a hypothetical peace negotiation between Ukraine and Russia using Smartsettle Infinity, as shown at the 21st International ODR Forum in Dublin. We'll be showing only the Ukrainian point of view in this video. There is a link to the Russia point of view at the end. Negotiating peace is not a new idea. Ukraine and Russia held their first negotiations attempting to stop the fighting early in March. Negotiations produced a list of issues, and both sides claimed that some progress had been made, but those negotiations are virtually stalled at the moment. Negotiating with Smartsettle Infinity is a whole new experience. The Smartsettle negotiation room has a virtual table that is perfectly neutral, trustworthy, safe, and secure and smart, where negotiations can happen anywhere, anytime, between any number of parties. NATO is shown here as a third party, but the simulation we are about to show is imagined as only between the two primary parties. In a real-life negotiation, the parties would be guided by facilitators, skilled at helping them achieve the best attainable outcome that is satisfactory to all parties. Communication through Smartsettle is enhanced with 8 sophisticated algorithms. These algorithms are the backbone of numerous features that are designed to foster collaboration among the parties. We imagined that the parties met together in collaborative discussions and agreed to a single negotiating framework. A single negotiating framework is essentially the final agreement, except for blanks that represent all the issues that every party wishes to negotiate using Infinity. These blanks can represent either numerical or optioned issues. The Smartsettle process works best if the parties pre-accept the framework in a binding way, so that the final step will be just a matter of filling in the blanks. Therefore, it is essential that the appropriate professionals review the framework before the parties reach agreement, and that all parties are confident that it is comprehensive, realistic, well-composed, and ready to implement immediately. In this negotiation, when the blanks are filled in, the single negotiating framework becomes the final agreement for a ceasefire and other conditions that will result in lasting peace. Shown here is an example of what the first page of this final agreement might look like, as published by Mark Weller on March 16th. Here is a summary of the issues that were included in our model. These issues are represented by the blanks in the single negotiating framework. We compiled these issues and the preferences of the parties from public information on the internet. Many assumptions were made as we interpreted that information. The actual preferences of the parties may be quite different, so it is important to take the results of this simulation only as a demonstration of how the Smartsettle process works. According to our assumptions, the issues are listed here in order of preference to Ukraine. The rightmost column specifies the importance assigned to each issue. Ukraine has adjusted the scale so that 1 point is about $1 billion. The most important issue to Ukraine is the sovereignty of the country at 900 points. Each issue has a number of possible outcomes. These are listed in order of preference to Ukraine, from least preferred to most preferred. For example, on the sovereignty issue, the least preferred outcome is Russia-led, and the most preferred outcome is no change. The next most important issue is Russia's contribution to the Joint Fund for Reconstruction. Ukraine prefers Russia to contribute $900 billion. This issue is assigned only 625 points because the satisfaction function is non-linear. It's not our purpose today to discuss the issues in any detail, but rather to demonstrate the Smartsettle process. What is important to understand here is that in a real-life negotiation, these preferences would be kept confidential by the system, known only ever to Ukraine and to Smartsettle at a neutral site. Now let's continue within the Smartsettle Infinity interface. This is Ukraine's private point of view, never seen by any other party. The panel on the left half of the screen lists the issues. What Ukraine prefers on each issue is on the right-hand side. Ukraine has created some private reference packages, including one that is planned as an optimistic proposal, and another called Status Quo. Ukraine's Status Quo package represents the absolute minimum that they must achieve in this negotiation. Ukraine has adjusted their scale so that the status quo package rating is 0. This way, it is easy to tell how much better each of the other packages are. The ratings of the packages are determined by the relative importances and satisfaction functions assigned to the issues. No other party can ever see this private information, and there is nothing yet on the table for Russia to see. Ukraine is ready to begin exchanging packages with Russia and will now submit their optimistic proposal. When it is placed on the table, Russia's initial proposal also appears there. How does it look? Not very good to Ukraine. It's even worse than the status quo. But these initial proposals do serve to narrow the negotiating ranges. The parties could continue negotiating this way, and it would be much better than negotiating issue by issue. But the Smartsettle neutral site, knowing how each party becomes satisfied, can speed up the process by generating suggestions that are more likely to be mutually acceptable. Before we continue, let's see what that looks like in satisfaction space. This view of the negotiation, after each party's preferences are well represented, is known only to Smartsettle at the neutral site. Shown here are only 2 dimensions of that model, Russia and Ukraine. Russia wants an outcome as close to the top as possible, 100% on the vertical scale, and Ukraine wants an outcome that is as far to the right as possible, 100% on the horizontal scale. Clearly, they will need to settle for something less than that, but each party will not agree to anything worse than the status quo, so we've labeled that point as 0-0. In game theory, the status quo is also called the Nash equilibrium if it's a place where decision makers get stuck and have no incentive to move to a better place, even if that better place exists. The Nash equilibrium is named after John Nash, who received a Nobel Prize in 1994 for work that he did in the 50s. Nash also said that those parties could get to a better place if they could somehow overcome the obstacles that keep them at the Nash equilibrium. That better place is anywhere between the status quo and the efficiency frontier in a region called the zone of possible agreement. In practice, the more likely place that parties will end up is above their targets in a zone of likely agreement. The research behind Smartsettle has created a process called visual blind bidding that is designed to help collaborative parties move from the status quo to an outcome on the efficiency frontier that is the best attainable solution that is satisfactory to all parties. Parties are encouraged to start the bargaining phase with optimistic proposals that represent somewhat more than they would consider fair, so that they still have some room to concede, but not so much more that the other party is offended. In this example, neither party would accept the other party's optimistic because they are both outside the zone of possible agreement. But Smartsettle can generate suggestions that fall between the optimistic proposals. Some of these packages fall in the zone of possible agreement and may be acceptable to the parties. The suggestions most likely to become an agreement are the ones that are above the target levels. Parties reach a baseline agreement at the end of a session if they have all accepted the same package. In order to get beyond the baseline to a fair and efficient solution, Nash prescribed an algorithm called Maximize the Utility Product. The algorithm used by Smartsettle, called Maximize the Minimum Gain, was developed independently by Dr. Thiessen at Cornell University. This alternative for generating an improvement was actually preferred to Nash by the late Harvard professor emeritus Howard Rafa, who was a prominent expert on negotiation theory. 2 of Rafa's colleagues, Fisher and Urey, wrote the bestseller Getting to Yes, which actually inspired much of the Smartsettle process. This process works for almost any formal negotiation that you can imagine between any number of parties. If this was a 3-party negotiation that involved another party, say NATO, then the efficiency frontier becomes a surface, but that does not complicate anything for the parties, as each individual party's view does not change. Proposals and suggestions appear on Smartsettle's virtual negotiating table, visible for all parties to see. Each package on the table has a satisfaction rating for each party. These ratings, which remain secret even after the negotiation is over, allow each party to decide whether or not to accept a particular package. Now back to the Infinity interface. The parties have exchanged initial proposals, and Smartsettle has generated some suggestions. These suggestions are all better than the status quo, but are not as good as Ukraine's target, so Ukraine is not ready to accept any of them. Instead, Ukraine decides to submit their better package as a masquerade. It becomes Package 6. This masquerade has been created by Ukraine, but appears to Russia no different than any other suggestion. The idea is to remove any bias that might discourage Russia from accepting this package. When Ukraine secretly accepts Package 6, a yellow dot appears that is not visible to Russia. If all parties accept the same package, they'll have a deal. When Ukraine requests an end to Session 1, Russia complies, but there is no agreement on a common package. In Session 2, Ukraine submits a second visible proposal, and we expect that Russia will too. Russia's new proposal is better than their first one, but still worse than the status quo. This is not very encouraging. So Ukraine decides to submit their target package as a masquerade, and then ends Session 2. However, no agreement is reached. In Session 3, Ukraine realizes that they have already conceded as far as they want to go, so they declare final session. When they do so, Packages 12 and 13 appear as suggestions. Package 12 is not that great, but Package 13 is interesting. It is different from Ukraine's target, but its rating happens to be identical, so if Ukraine's preferences are well represented, they should logically accept it. They do so, and say that they're done with final session. Remember that whenever all parties end a session, Smartsettle checks to see if there are any packages that have been accepted by all parties. Now, when Session 3 ends, Ukraine is pleased that Russia has also accepted Package 13, and it has become the baseline. After a search for hidden value, Smartsettle offers an improvement that is worth 333 points more to Ukraine than the baseline. This is the value that Smartsettle uncovered. If the negotiation had lasted many sessions, this value may have been delivered by means of a suggestion generated along the way. Either way, if both parties have their preferences well represented, Smartsettle's signature algorithm, Maximize the Minimum Gain, works at the end of the process to make sure that there is no value left on the table. After all parties accept the improvement, it becomes their final agreement. Having already prepared a sound framework worthy of international treaty status, it is a simple matter of filling it in, and their negotiation is complete. This graph shows the satisfaction ratings of the outcome packages compared with each other, relative to the status quo set to 0. If 1 point is worth $1 billion, then the value of a peace treaty is worth more than $500 billion to Ukraine. We recognize that one cannot put a definite value on human suffering and lives lost due to war. The important conclusion is that there would be an immense value gained by both parties by immediately agreeing to a ceasefire. You will recognize this better if you also watch the companion video showing this simulation from Russia's point of view on the Smartsettle e-negotiation channel on YouTube. Due to slightly updated preferences, the generated suggestions and the outcomes in each simulation are slightly different, but you will see that Smartsettle also uncovers immense hidden value for Russia. Thanks for watching.